All right, today we're cracking open a book that tries to do something really fascinating, to find the man behind one of the most influential figures in all of history. We're looking at Lesley Hazleton's The First Muslim, and the goal here is to get past the prophet, to get to the person.
And really, it all boils down to this one question. Who was Muhammad before he was a prophet? That's what drives this whole story. It's all about peeling back these layers, centuries of legend and reference, to find the actual human being underneath.
So let's set the scene. We're in the year 610, and our story doesn't start with a prophet in full flow. Nope. It starts with a middle-aged guy, about 40 years old, all alone on a mountain, just outside Mecca. And he's looking for something. And this is where it gets really interesting, because there's this huge contrast, right? On one side, you've got this guy who had a really tough start. He was an orphan, but he totally overcame it. He's a successful merchant, he's happily married, he's respected in town, he's made it. But on the other hand, he keeps going back to that mountain, seeking out that solitude. Why? The earliest descriptions of him are really cool. He wasn't some skinny, withdrawn mystic. They say he was solidly built, had a healthy complexion, but it's this little detail about his walk that it's so perfect. He always walked leaning forward, as though he were hurrying towards something. It's like he was physically here, but his mind, his soul, was already reaching for what was next.
So that's the real puzzle, isn't it? Why would a man who has, by all accounts, made it, he has comfort, respect, a family, why would he spend his nights alone in the desert? Clearly, the security and contentment he'd built just wasn't cutting it. He was wrestling with these huge questions, searching for, as the author puts it, a glimpse of something bigger. Well, one night during Ramadan, his search didn't just end, it exploded. And according to his own telling of the story, he had absolutely no idea what was about to hit him. He was completely, utterly unprepared.
So I want you to just throw out any preconceived notions you have about divine revelation, because what he found up there, it wasn't elation.
There were no golden halos or choirs of angels.
It wasn't ecstasy. What he found was terror, just raw, bone-deep terror. He felt like he was being crushed by this overwhelming force, something so powerful he was convinced it was an evil spirit, a jinn, come to destroy him.
Yeah, this was not some gentle whisper in his ear. This was a violent, physical experience. The story goes that he was squeezed, pressed so hard he literally couldn't breathe. 3 times. He thought he was going to die. His entire sense of self was just obliterated in that moment.
And right there, at the absolute peak of that terror, the very first words of what would later become the Quran were basically forced out of him, not just spoken, but seared into his soul. Okay, so the event itself is incredible, but what's maybe even more important, especially for understanding the man, is how he reacted to it. Because his reaction, it turns the whole prophet legend on its head. Think about it. He didn't stride down that mountain, chest puffed out, ready to preach. He fled. He ran down that mountain shaking, not with holy joy, but with sheer terror. He wasn't filled with conviction. He was swamped with doubt. He was 100% convinced that he was losing his mind. And get this is from the earliest historical accounts, and it's just staggering. His despair was so absolute, the terror was so complete, that his first thought, his first instinct, was to go to the nearest cliff and throw himself off, to commit suicide just to make it stop.
Now, this right here is the author's central point. Think about it. If you were making up a holy story, a legend, would you have your hero react with terror, doubt, and wanting to kill himself? No way. Hazleton argues that this raw, messy, incredibly human reaction is actually the strongest evidence we have that something real, something truly profound happened to him up there. But see, that level of humanity, that fallibility, it doesn't sit well with our need for perfect religious figures, does it? It's so human, in fact, that later on some theologians tried to scrub this part of the story clean. They insisted, oh, he never doubted. They tried to skip over the suicide attempt. But when you do that, you don't just lose a detail, you risk losing the man himself.
So that brings us to the big question, and the whole approach of this book. How do we actually see the real story? How do we get past all those layers of myth and reverence?
Well, Hazleton's method is what she calls an agnostic stance. And that doesn't just mean what you think. It means putting piety and worship on one shelf and putting all the negative stereotypes on another shelf. Just clear the table and try to see the man in full. The guy who struggled, who was scared, who doubted. just like a real person. And there's such a powerful idea in that. You know, when we put people on a pedestal and make them perfect, we think we're honoring them. But what we're actually doing is dehumanizing them. We sand off all the rough edges, all the complex, messy bits that made them who they were. And we're left with this simple, boring icon instead of a real, compelling human being.
This quote just nails it. The less you lean on the supernatural, the more incredible his life actually becomes. When you see him as a man, this orphan, this outsider who goes through absolute terror and doubt, and still manages to change the course of human history, wow. I mean, that's a much bigger, more powerful story than any simple miracle, isn't it?
So, that's the question we're left with. If you strip away all the layers of legend, does the human story that's left become even more extraordinary? Maybe the real power here isn't in some pre-written divine destiny, but in the unbelievable journey of a very human man who stared into the abyss and somehow found a way to keep going.